So I'd like to welcome everyone to the side event for the Society Approach Rights-Based Implementation of the GBF, Insights from the NBSAP Processes. My name is Moonal. I am from the Women for Biodiversity, and I'll be moderating the session for today. So before we go in, just a little bit about why this session. We all know that the whole of society approach and the human rights-based approach are emphasized in the KMGBF, and elements of it are also reflected in the target, several targets. But there is a bit of a struggle for member states to incorporate elements of human rights and whole of society approaches. So this this event was especially to look at experiences from member states who have tried to incorporate the whole of society approach and the human rights-based approach in the updation of their NBSAPs. We are also we'll also be presenting some findings from a civil society-led survey on experiences of civil society on the processes of NBSAP and whether they have been following this approach. And we will also be launching a guidance also prepared by civil society members and academicians and researchers, which aims to promote the integration of the human rights-based approach. So we can start the session. Next slide, please. Yeah, just a bit of house rules. If you require interpretation in either French or Spanish, we would encourage you to use your own laptops and click on the globe icon for the language that you want to use. Also, we would request you to mute your mic when you are not speaking, but if you do want to, we have a question and answer session. So if you do want to ask questions, please come closer to the mics, switch the mics on and please ask your questions. If you would, for the people who are joining us online, if you want to drop suggestions or ask any questions, please use the Q&A box and the chat box. We will hopefully finish the session in 1.5 hours. I would request the speakers to please keep to their time because we have a lot of speakers and lots of different experiences that we wish to hear. So I will also be in time, so I'm really sorry about this, but I will have to do it. And yes, please do log into translations. So I will hand over to Christina Egenter from WWF International now. She has spent over 20 years doing conservation work with indigenous people, local communities, and women in Indonesia, as well as Borneo, and has been working for 3 years at WWF International, where she focuses on human rights-based approaches. Christina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Minal, and welcome to everybody. I'm just speaking on behalf also of a colleague, Shruti, from Women for Biodiversity, because as part of the Human Rights in Biodiversity Working Group, which is a platform of several civil society organizations, rights holders networks, and so on, all interested in advancing the agenda of the human rights-based approach in the city. We took the initiative to look at all of society, as we understand the big call in the GBF, in the implementation of the GBF, how that plays out. And we focus on the in the context of NBSAP's revision process. So this survey, maybe next slide. Okay, we didn't cover the entire world. As you can see, that was an impossible dream. So still ongoing, but we had 54 responses from 29 countries. You can see that. And there is a little QR code. If you can scan, you'll get a little bit more information on numbers, percentage, and so on. It's still preliminary analysis because the survey is simple, but has a lot of interesting quantitative elements to it about participation and so on. So I'll try to sum up. And I hope I'm not speaking too fast for the interpreter. To sum up a few findings, preliminary findings. About the question, how did you get to know of the NBSAP's consultation, by and large, invitation by government to civil society organization was the answer. But it's also interesting to see the role of civil society networks in spreading the information and getting more people involved. Another small point is that proactive outreach to the government in many situations pays off, in the sense that the information might not, the government might not have the information about particular constituents of civil society, but if they have the information, reach out to the government could accommodate that. Most likely to be, who are the folks most likely to be invited to consultation with civil society? By and large, conservation NGOs are the ones, the majority, but also indigenous peoples, local communities, and youth is well represented. Way less represented are women associations and networks, especially grassroots members and humanitarian civil society organizations. But there were a lot of comments in the survey, in the responses to the survey about the need to trust building is still something to be strengthened. The issue of legitimate representation, who do we know represent who, is still an issue on both sides. And uneven information. The information doesn't necessarily always go to all levels. Another interesting finding is direct participation pays off. So this is because there is a positive correlation between the ability to participate fully and meaningfully in this consultation and voicing directly the asks and the aspirations. There is a way more higher chance that this will be included in the NBSAP's draft. And that sits well also with another consideration, which is the issues that constituents of civil society bring up tend to be those issues for which they are the best advocates. And they tend to be very focused and strategic. So if we ask, what are the issues? It comes back to indigenous people rights, gender equality, and so on. That they are the best, as I said, advocates. Preliminary recommendation, I would like to end with the 3 points of consideration. One is that multi-stakeholder platforms, voluntary as they might be, are very important, will be very important to have the dialogue continue and not just be one event just for that consultation of that NBSAPs, but also prepare for the whole of society implementation of the framework. Subnational consultation, where these happens, help immensely in terms of connecting with more civil society voices and rights of their voices. And the third, of course, the resources are needed. And it's not just money, but money is a very important consideration. But maybe we can see this as the need to invest long-term in the whole of society implementation of the framework. And civil society organizations can certainly contribute to those resources, just in passing. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. We now have members of party members with us, and we would really like to hear from them about how they have incorporated some aspects of human rights and the whole of society approach in updating the NBSAPs. So I'd like to start with Mr. Henry, who is from the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism in Namibia. He is the project coordinator at the Liberian Ministry of Environment, Forestry, and Tourism. He's an environmentalist with education, knowledge, skills, and professional experience in biodiversity management and conservation, environment and climate change, socio-ecological and socio-economic systems, policy and governance, and project development management, monitoring, and evaluation. Over to you, Mr. Moody.
Thank you for the opportunity. We are proud to be asked to share our experiences. Maybe just to start, NBSAP has recognized that for the successful conservation, biodiversity management, and sustainable use of natural resources requires the engagement of all stakeholders to be able to achieve the required outputs. But also, we recognize that we need to empower communities to be able to manage this resource, but also to be able to benefit from the resource. So that's why from the onset, even before the current review and alignment of NBSAP, we have always tried to work with the civil society organizations to be able to empower our communities and to be able to serve. So the government have always acknowledged the vital role they play in supporting, strengthening communities to manage the resources effectively. But how did we do it over time? The first thing was to build trust and transparency and the way we communicate. So we have a proactive communication systems of environmental policy, environmental plans, and decision-making processes, which enables us to regularly brief, have interactions, have feedback mechanisms of the civil society and community-based organization at both at national but also at regional level, where our offices are. But also the regular consultations allows feedback, and this feedback are the basis for informed decision-making in the different processes that we take, we do. The other approach is to enable effective participation and collaboration with stakeholders. So we do encourage and have trend planning and implementation, where civil societies help us and we help them to develop programs, to develop awareness, to develop capacity initiatives that are specifically targeted to empower communities in areas of conservation, resource management, and sustainable use. But also, attached to that, we have trend monitoring and evaluation. These are now where we use those feedback groups to be able then to align interventions, adjust interventions as we go, but also then develop policies that respond to what we see happening on the ground. Additionally, we encourage fostering a mutual learning and mutual accountability, where we know the civil society organizations have the ability to understand the different on-the-ground systems, structures, problems that communities are experiencing. Then we rely on them quite a lot in understanding that and implementing projects and initiatives that are meant to target communities. But most importantly, they help us in advocating common interests that we have. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, we rely solely on civil society to go to where that the members of, say, the staff of the ministry cannot reach. And this now helps us to establish monitoring systems that track both the impacts of resource management, resource use, wildlife populations, issues that also affects the community, and especially when it comes to human wildlife conflict management. The civil society organizations are on the ground with communities much more than we could in their areas, including the vastness of our country, that we might not get, but they do help. However, in doing all that, we understand that we encounter challenges, And mostly some of these relate to both financial and technical capacities, both from the ministry side, but also from the side of the civil society. Looking at the vast areas of the country, getting everyone together requires some financial resources, but also taking into consideration the languages that we have, getting and translating some of the information that the community requires in the various languages is not also easy. In terms of capacity, challenges related to capacity, mainly we focus on those challenges that prevent communities to effectively benefit from these, being mainly issues related to market access, marketing itself, but issues related to financial management, budgeting, right? So we have dedicated programs, but what we find more challenging is issues related to negotiating contracts and executing these contracts. So maybe just in conclusion, we have realized that involving more stakeholders in biodiversity conservation, sustainable use is essential to achieve lasting and equitable benefits from biodiversity. It fosters ownership, promotes inclusive solution, strengthens implementation, and improves the overall governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. We will now move on to Q3. We have Ms. Sika Bhagwani with us, who is the National Secretary of Environmental and Indigenous Territorial Management, and also the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples NBSAP. Please take the floor.
Gostaria de saudar os demais colegas da mesa. Agradeço bastante o convite. A GIV tem sido uma importante, decisiva parceira no processo de construção das demandas e na estruturação de todo o Ministério dos Povos Indígenas do Brasil. Como sabem, este é o primeiro ministério de nossa história. Temos menos de um ano e meio e a GIV está desde o início apoiando essa construção. O movimento indígena brasileiro, até o momento, tinha pouco contato com a Convenção da Biodiversidade. Houve uma participação boa em Montreal, mas no ano passado, o foco do movimento estava muito na COP do clima. Este ano já há uma boa expectativa para ir à COP.
Excellent. I would like to read out the conference statement and with appreciation the invitation. GIZ has been important decisive partner in the process of building NBSAP and structuring the new supplementary papers in Brazil. As you know, this is the first ministry in human history. We are less than a half years. Both and GIZ have been supporting this construction since the beginning. The Brazilian digital movement till now has still contact with the Biodiversity Convention. There was a good participation in Montreal, but last year the movement was very much of climate change convention. This year, there is already a good expectation to them to come.
Esta expectativa vem de dois processos apoiados pela GIZ. O primeiro deles é a retomada do Comitê Gestor da Política Nacional de Gestão Territorial e Ambiental de Terras Indígenas, depois de anos parado pelos governos anteriores. É por este comitê, com representação indígena de todos os biomas do Brasil e paritário entre movimento e governo, que desde o ano passado retomamos os debates de como os povos indígenas podem fazer a melhor gestão dos seus territórios, promovendo a sociobioeconomia indígena e protegendo a biodiversidade. Do ponto de vista do governo, apoiamos a estruturação de planos de gestão locais e a construção de políticas públicas que fortaleçam as iniciativas dos povos e territórios indígenas. Assim, é por meio dele que iniciamos o diálogo das demandas.
This expectation comes from two processes supported by GIZ. The first one is the resumption of the steering committee of the national policy for territorial and environment management of indigenous lands, which we call TENAGAT, after years of being stopped by previous government. It's through this committee with indigenous representatives from all biomes in Brazil, and with a parity between movement and government, that since last year we have created debates on how indigenous peoples can better manage their territories, promote an indigenous social bioeconomy, and protecting the biodiversity. From the government point of view, we support the structure of local management plans and the construction of public policy that strengthens the initiatives of indigenous peoples and territories. Thus, it's through this committee that we begin the NBSAP dialogue.
O segundo processo é o de construção das demandas propriamente ditas. Não temos dúvidas da importância de uma abordagem baseada nos direitos humanos. A tragédia que estamos vivenciando no Brasil e também ocorrida aqui no Quênia não deixa dúvidas sobre a relação entre emergências climáticas, proteção da biodiversidade e a garantia dos direitos humanos. Na última reunião do Comitê Gestor, houve uma primeira etapa de formação das lideranças do movimento. Agora, de 10 a 14 de julho, haverá uma grande oficina com representantes do movimento indígena, quilombola e campesinos, para construir as primeiras propostas destes setores e incluir temas relacionados à biodiversidade e direitos humanos.
The second process in this construction of the NBSAP itself. The second process is the construction of the NBSAP itself. We have no doubt about the importance of human rights-based approach. The tragedy we experience in Brazil and which also here in Kenya, there's no doubt about the relationship between climate change, protection, biodiversity, and of human rights. As the last meeting of the steering committee, there was a first stage training movement leadership. Now, from 10 to the 14th of June, there will be a large workshop with representatives of the indigenous movement, local communities, and campaigns to build the first proposal from the sector and include them related to biodiversity and human rights.
Depois, apoiaremos o Ministério do Meio Ambiente e Mudança do Clima na realização de 7 etapas regionais com o movimento, que visa consultar os povos indígenas sobre as metas e diretrizes das demandas, garantindo sua participação efetiva nessa construção e sistematizando essas experiências de forma conjunta. A meta do Brasil é fazer a construção mais participativa possível e entregar as demandas antes da COP16, onde esperamos a presença do presidente Lula, da ministra Sônia Guajajara e de amplas representações do movimento indígena.
After all, we support the Minister of Environment and Climate Change carry out 7 regional stages of the movement, which aims to consult indigenous people and goes to guidelines of the NBSAP, ensure the effective participation in this construction, and systematizing this experience jointly. Brazil goes to make the construction participatory as possible and as participatory as possible and deliver the NBSAP before COP16. Where we respect the presence of President Lula, our Minister Sônia Guajajara, and broad representation of the indigenous people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We will now go back to the speakers and we have speakers. So we have firstly Mr. Jerome Montreal, who is from the delegation, and he's the executive director of the Foundation for the Philippine Environment. So Mr. Jerome.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jerome Montreal from the Foundation for the Philippine Environment, and we are a non-stock nonprofit organization that was a beneficiary by the For Nature Swap, and we use our funding to support civil society organizations, including IPs, organizations, youth organizations, women's organizations, to assist them in their pursuit of biodiversity project. I start with that because as part of our sharing, in the course of updating our NBSAP, which we call the Philippine Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, or PBSAP. We have so far conducted 6 regional consultations that involve uh, at least 20 representatives from civil society organizations, indigenous peoples, youth organizations, and NGOs across each of the 6 regional consultations that we have conducted starting last year. The biggest so far was 37 out of a total of 155 in one consultation that comprise IPLCs, community organizations represented by people's organizations, as well as representatives from the youth organizations that are engaged in biodiversity conservation in the Philippines. So this is part of our effort to help ensure that our updating of our NBSAPs are consistent with our full of society, full of government approach. Together with our participants from the civil society groups, we also have representatives from the national government agencies, from not just from the Environment Ministry, but also from the Agriculture Ministry, from the Climate Change Commission, and from other related agencies, including our interior and local government, our National Indigenous Peoples Commission, which is charged with ensuring the affairs and participation of our indigenous peoples. We also have academe representatives that bring in the perspective from the science and technology part of biodiversity. And of course, let me not forget that local government units are also well represented during our regional consultations. And to help us complete our journey towards updating our NBSAP in alignment with the GBF, our next step is to bring together again this key stakeholders and actors from the state and non-state actors in a national consultation that will happen right after SBI. I think towards late June or July, we will see again all these different agencies from the government and from the civil society sector. And we also invite representatives from the private sector to also participate and add value to the updating part of our NBSAP. And we're very happy that, of course, since we have started discussion of SBI, financial resources have always been a key concern, right? In the Philippines, our experience is that funding for our updating of the NBSAP did not come just from our government resources. Local funding facilities such as the Foundation for the Philippine Environment, which I represent, also chipped in, as well as international and other local funding facility. Together with contribution from government, we were able to pull it off despite the challenges of bringing people from 7,400 islands. Of course, we can't bring everybody, but at least we help ensure our representatives are there. The next challenge for us would be, even though there are spaces provided and resources were contributed to ensure participation of our indigenous peoples, youth, and other local communities and women, sometimes I think coming from the pandemic, so many activities are happening all at the same time. And it's the challenge that we're facing is making sure we are in the same calendar and schedule. So that's our sort of practical challenge right now. So many things happening, and we're trying to address that by preparing early. So right now we're already advising our partners on the schedule the upcoming activities. On top of that, just one final note, which I forgot to mention. On top of these regional consultations, we are very happy to share that there are also sectoral consultations and roundtable discussions that we have been supporting. One of which was just before SAMSTA, together with a group of ABI, we have supported the gathering of indigenous peoples to discuss the updating of the NBSAP 30 by 30 and discussion on the proposed policy on OECMs in the Philippines. So we also had another one specifically with the youth, and we hope to do more with the other sectors, probably with the women and with others who are vested in the NBSAP. I think that's all the time that I have. Thank you very much. If you want to know more, I have more stories to share, but perhaps later.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. We also have a question and answer session. So we can take up more questions as they come. We also have Ms. Abigail from the Philippines, who is working with the coalition of indigenous people organizations and civil society on issues of biodiversity. So Abigail, if you would like to share something.
Thank you, Mina. Yes, and just to complement what has been shared earlier. So just very quickly, I'll just share some slides. So actually, Sefa Tauli from PIKP and Given was supposed to share, but she's not available at the moment. So I'll be sharing her presentation. So the next slide, please. Maybe at the end, we can skip the introductory parts. Can skip to, yeah, we're just showing the work already being done on the ground. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so as we have shared earlier, a coalition of indigenous peoples organizations and civil society has come together to follow the NBSAP process and to try to engage more indigenous peoples organizations to learn more about what's happening in the KM-GBF. And these are some of the achievements we have made since 2022. So we have at least a number of organizations who have tried to engage through round-table discussions. So we have had 2 national ones and 1 regional one. And we have also tried to participate in the subnational consultations on our Philippine GBF. And during our second consultation, we were able to bring forth key messages from the group and to collaborate with the government in possibly preparing indigenous people's biodiversity plan that we hope to be included in the actual Philippine plan. And so this work we will still undertake. So some the challenges that we have had, I think this is general, but basically I guess in all countries, there are challenges in creating enabling conditions and space for civil society to contribute. And in the Philippines, notwithstanding the challenges in finances and logistics, they have tried to provide this. But of course, it could always improve. Second is also for us, we had some challenges in preparing ourselves in effectively engaging in the process. So because we couldn't convene like regional consultations, we had to do some preparation over Zoom, and sometimes that can be difficult. But we hope that has helped in improving those the knowledge of those who were able indigenous peoples who were able to engage in the regional consultations. Another challenge we are seeing now is oh sorry. I'll try to wrap up very quickly, is that given the limited time since our national consultation would be in August, and we have committed to propose a section for indigenous peoples, there's a limited time for us to have a write-up and to try to be very inclusive. So that's a challenge with me. Another is that the elements of the NBSAPs would need alignment with existing policies. So that's also some things we need to ensure post the NBSAP, the adoption of the NBSAP. And then, yeah, and then of course, we would like to be also still continue this momentum of full and effective participation in the implementation and then the monitoring and reporting of our national biodiversity. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abigail. We also have Mr. Soren Miller, and they have conducted GIZ global project on strengthening the national implementation of the global biodiversity targets. So Mr. Muller is the Senior Policy Officer with the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Mr. Muller, if you could take the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. As you said, I'm speaking on behalf of the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, Germany, and just to complement the former speakers in the way to show up how, from a donor's perspective, we address the very important topic of human rights-based and the whole of society approach. As you can see in the first slide, maybe skip to the next one. Thanks. Thank you so much. Like, let's say as like our guiding policies within the German Development Corporation, we have our human rights strategy that we recently updated again, and that already contains very strong language on how to really implement the human rights-based approach across all the sectors that we deal with. So including biodiversity sector, but we practically deal with all the SDGs. So that is also complemented by a strong will by our government to deliver on a feminist development policy. So in terms of promoting the rights, the resources, and the representation of women and marginalized groups, so we call it short the 3 Rs. And those two, let's say, overarching strategies, those ones we translated into our recently published strategy on conserving nature and natural resources, protecting life on Earth. That will be our guiding instrument in German Development Corporation until 2030, year to deliver on the GBF. So, and there's like the main essence to that strategy is that wherever we work and all the activities regarding biodiversity, that we would always put the people at the heart of the interventions and see how to strengthen their human rights, how to support equal access to resources, how to enable representation and their active and meaningful participation. So the next slide, we can just, I won't go too much into detail of that complex graph, but just to tell you that from German Development Corporation side, we both deal with the state actors, the duty bearers on, oh, sorry, next slide, please, yeah. So that we would deliver, that we would address both state actors that demand support on how to set up an inclusive system or coordination mechanism or consultation mechanism, but we would also address the right holders themselves, civil society organizations, the IPNC organizations, to support them in their advocacy work and their participation. So that's like the package we would, let's say, deliver on. And next slide, please. As a result of the GBF, we set up a global support program that is called Strengthening National Implementation of Global Biodiversity Targets. That is under the framework of the NBSAP Accelerated Partnership and funded by our ministry together with NORAD from Norwegian support. So that is actually like, let's say that's a technical work package we would provide and offer to selected partner countries in order to put them in a better position to really implement and effectively implement national biodiversity targets in line with the GBF. That mainly consists of 3 components. One is supporting our partner countries in the NBSAP revision update process and in the implementation of selected priority measures. We also have a very strong component on the participation of indigenous peoples and local communities. And thirdly, we support our partner countries in their knowledge transfer, in their mutual learning. Just very recently, the other day here, we had this networking event together with the NBSAP Accelerator Partnership to bring the countries together and to really learn from each other in the process and to exchange about challenges and solutions also. And let's say the whole of the government and whole of society approach that is really streamlined throughout all these 3 components. On the next slide, we just show you the partner countries that we're working with. It's mainly 3 in South America, 3 in Africa, and 2 Asia, and by the support of our Norwegian partners, we would add DRC and Indonesia to it. So we can thank a lot for that. So just very quickly on the next slide, addressing what are the challenges that we see during the implementation of the program that runs until 2025. That we obviously see there's the elephant in the room, there's the time pressure to deliver until COP16 for the updating and the revision of the NBSAP. So that is something we share jointly. But as you already said, depending on the vast extension of some countries, or in the case of the Philippines, like a lot of islands, it's really difficult to guarantee that participative process. But also we see like in the process, the need for continuity of civil society involvement, not only like in the revision and update process of NBSAPs, but also in the implementation, the follows, and the monitoring and reporting. So creating that continuity is key to us. So also we see that there might be some gaps between the organized civil society that's already very educated at the national level and the political decision making. But on the other hand, we have local civil society that maybe doesn't have that access to the decision-making processes to really link those two levels. But also we see globally, let's say, in some countries, shrinking spaces for civil society engagement, or in general limited space for civil society engagement. So how to really guarantee a meaningful way that participation is now a challenge. And then we see this huge need for capacity building in general terms on what is the GBF, what is the monitoring framework, creating communication and awareness raising strategies to really tell people on the ground about the importance of those frameworks and how would they relate with maybe their proper perspectives and cosmovisions on nature, and to really link those different levels to each other. So in the last slide, we just wanted to show some promising approaches that we could already find during our implementation of the program, the global support program, that we do see an increasing political will just by having strong references in the GBF and in the targets for the civil society engagement and participation. We see that this is reflected at the state level, but also we see at the subnational level the interest for regional and local NBSAP adaptation. So that is a big advantage for the process, that we have all of them on board and willing to deliver. But and we also see that what is needed is like this technical advice to all partner countries and to the partner institutions on how to inclusively set up this NBSAP coordination and consultation mechanism. So that is why we offer these packages for the partner countries in a demand-driven way to respond to that. We also try to identify synergies with existing civil society platforms for consultations. For instance, maybe there are already platforms in the context of climate change agenda. So maybe we can just get together there and make use of those existing platforms. We see there's a whole need for capacity building, how to meaningfully engage in the revision, so that we can offer as well. And also we try to strengthen IPLC organizations, creating trainings designed by IPLC organizations themselves that really would reflect their needs and their cosmovisions and their priorities. And lastly, we engage in fostering regional and international exchange. As I said, it's key that peer-to-peer review, peer-to-peer exchange, sorry. And yeah, maybe I leave it like that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all the speakers. We would actually like to open the floor now for around 5 minutes for any questions that you may have, and especially reflecting on some of the things that we've heard from the different parties. how can civil society support the work of the parties to ensure a human rights-based approach? So we can take maybe one or two reflections if it is possible. If anybody has something to say.
Thank everyone for the presentation and the explanation and the experience showing in the countries. I would like to ask about what the ideas that you have been thinking to maintain the participation of IPLC during the GBF implementation. If this is going to be more related with indicators and the country report process, or through those platforms or some institutionality that is going to be created, or I don't know, the initial reflections. I know that it's an ongoing process, but
Thank you so much for that. Would anybody?
Thank you for that very important question. So in the experience of the Philippines, in the process of updating our NBSAP, we have a very long Google sheet or Excel sheet, the sheet. And one of the important rows there, column, is the key actors that needs to engage directly and support. So we have already asked the relevant stakeholders to list their names if these key indicators or key activities, they are either the movers or they are supports or they will be the beneficiary, and this will be tracked, and we will ensure that if we can do it specific organizations, specific communities, we try to do that. If not, the sector are identified, but in our experience, those who are participating already list their organizations or their communities down to the village level. So it's a very tedious work, but I believe it's important to ensure that throughout the implementation, we know who and where we should work with, and would be part of the reporting later on as to the actual contributions and accomplishments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have a question and answer session towards the end, so we'll just move on now with the presentations. We have from the Human Rights Working Group, we have Helen, also part of the Forest Peoples Program. Helen, if you could take the floor.
Hi everyone. Is the audio okay in the room? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, great. Well, thank you very much for making the opportunity for me to speak online. I'm really pleased to be able to join you. I wish I was able to be in the room with you all for this conversation. It's an incredibly important one. I have the privilege, if you could go to the next slide, please. I have the privilege today to be talking about human rights and the human rights-based approach to the global biodiversity framework. I'm going to be walking you through the results of quite a large collaborative initiative that has been undertaken over the last 5 to 6 months to try and offer some tools to support the effective use of a human rights-based approach across the GBF. Next slide, please. The context in which we undertook this initiative as the Human Rights and Biodiversity Working Group was a recognition that when the Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted in 2022, there were human rights and human rights issues and concerns were placed really at the heart and the center of that plan in a way that we hadn't seen before in environmental policymaking and environmental decision making. And I just want to highlight a few to really underscore how different this plan was when it was adopted. First, Indigenous peoples and local communities are mentioned 18 times across the decision and the Global Biodiversity Framework. That's more than any other sort of element of the framework. a human rights-based approach is committed to at the beginning of the plan, that the entire plan will be implemented with a human rights-based approach. This sits in section C, which is the preambular or the sort of framing element of the global biodiversity framework. It's not just a human rights-based approach. There are other elements in section C that are highlighted and underscored for us. One is a commitment to intergenerational equity. And I also wanted to point to the term equity, because this term comes up again over and over the framework. Equity refers to fairness, to justice, to positive outcomes and equal outcomes. There's also commitments to gender justice, and in Target 22, commitments to rights to lands, territories and resources, not only for Indigenous peoples and local communities, but also for women, for girls, for children and youth. And Target 22 also commits to the full protection of environmental human rights defenders. So each one of these elements that I've highlighted here for you are quite transformational, quite different for environmental policy making at the national, subnational and local levels. If you could go to the next slide, please. But one of the things that became very clear to us as a wider community working on human rights is that these commitments weren't entirely matched by the necessary guidance and tools that parties and non-state actors could use to really meet these new commitments, these new the new territory that had been put into the global biodiversity framework. So some of the gaps that we noticed were gaps on how national biodiversity strategy and action plans might be created, both procedurally and in terms of outcomes, if they were going to meet the human rights commitments that were in the framework. We also saw things like Indigenous and traditional territories mentioned for the first time. And there's no definition or guidance yet as to what this category may mean in practice. In order to undertake a human rights-based approach, it's very important to be able to understand how to recognise rights holders and the rights that those groups and individuals hold. It's also very important to be able to identify duty bearers, those who hold duties or additional responsibilities in order to protect, meet or fulfil human rights. So we as a collective decided that we should try to fill some of these gaps. We should be trying to do something together that would be able to address and provide additional tools and support for those who would need to be implementing this approach this year, next year, through to 2030 and beyond. Next slide, please. So the idea was born about 6 months ago that there was a need for a human rights-based approach guide for the global biodiversity framework itself. So looking at this particular context, the context of the framework, the commitments that are in the framework, and thinking about what a human rights-based approach would mean to the way it's approached, but also the outcomes that are sought. So this new guide is what we're launching here today. It's coming out in public for the first time at this event. One thing I wanted to underscore is this is a collaborative initiative. 21 authors from social movements, from academia, from research institutes, NGOs, Indigenous peoples organisations, youth groups, gender justice and women's groups, all collaborated over 5 or 6 months to come up with this guide. It was intended from the very beginning to be additional to what is available out in the world already, and to very clearly signpost other high quality, good practice or good guidance that we knew was out there. We're releasing today the first edition. It is still open for improvement, for feedback, for thoughts, and there will be additional editions launched in the future. But today we're very proud to be launching the first edition. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So I'm not expecting anyone to read this slide, but I wanted to just give you a sense of what we tried to do in the guide and what to expect when you scan and download and have a look at the guide yourself. So one thing we wanted to be very clear about is what a human rights-based approach is, where it came from, and what it means in the context of environmental decision-making. It's also particularly important in the GBF to understand how to identify rights holder groups. The GBF itself specifically identifies certain rights holder groups who are most likely to be impacted by decisions about environmental and biodiversity decision making. So we see some of them listed here: women and girls, people in rural areas, local communities, indigenous peoples. So Section 1 really looks at those sort of definitional and identification issues. Section 2 moves into the foundational elements of what a human rights-based approach means and starts to look at terms like equity, like participation, access to justice, access to information, and really starting to try and look at the text of the GBF and try to simplify and explain what that terminology is. And as I'm sure everyone in this room knows and understands, the text that comes out of a negotiation is not always as clear and as straightforward as it might be. So the text of the GBF has some complexity and some difficulties in it. So Section 2 of this guide is really looking to simplify what is it actually intended, what does it actually mean, and to give some key guiding questions on how to approach understanding what these terms mean at a practical level. The third section looks at the procedures, so the processes and the systems by which we do things. We focused on planning, on raising and using finance, and then on monitoring and reporting as particularly essential segments or elements in environmental decision-making and practice. And then the final section that we put into the guide was looking at some areas in which we felt additional guidance was necessary because they are either particularly contentious or particularly complex. The 4 areas that we knew we needed to give some additional guidance on were land tenure and land use change, sea tenure and marine resources, nature-based solutions, and customer and sustainable use. This list of special considerations is likely to grow in the future, and if we feel that there's a need for some additional guidance, we'll certainly be developing that section further. At the end of the guide, we also map the entirety of the 23 targets against human rights considerations that are likely to come up in the implementation or the meeting of those particular targets. And one of the things that we wanted to make very clear to audiences of the guide is that there is no element of the global biodiversity framework which doesn't have some overlap with human rights, whether the securing of a particular target would contribute to realizing human rights or whether there are some human rights that are at risk in attempts to meet particular targets. So both in a positive and in a cautionary way, we were trying to map the relationship between human rights and the global biodiversity framework as a whole. If you could go to the next slide, please. Oh, no, yes, there we go. So this is the QR code for anybody to download it. As I said before, it's in English at the moment, and it will be produced in different languages. Just before I close, I wanted to recognize the speakers before me in this event, and to, in particular, what I found fascinating and very positive was the clear examples of the way in which a human rights-based approach is already being interpreted and implemented and applied at the national level and at the subnational level. Some of the descriptions of participation in the NBSAP process that we heard were really inspiring. And we hope that this guide will be able to enhance and support those kinds of good faith efforts that are being made at all levels and at all countries. So with that, I'd like to recognise all the other authors of this guide, because I'm not speaking just for myself, and to note that many of the authors of this guide are sitting in the room with you in Nairobi and can answer questions about the content and intentions of the guides as well. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. We'll now open the floor for any comments, any questions, anything specific that you would want to ask either the authors of the study or the GIZ project, global project, or any of our parties who are represented here. So we can have around 10 minutes for discussions.
Like this just moves to terms of how the civil society is supported in terms of so that we learn on how that happens and how do you balance in that sometimes find the government and the civil society sometimes on these issues they are having different approaches. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. In terms of the support to monitoring, I think it comes from the fact that the planning of activities and interventions in communities are done jointly with civil societies on specific aspects. And we have an association of civil societies and another association for service community-based natural resource management that brings together all the data from the different local civil society organizations, and that helps us then to get that information. But also maybe to mention through the support of one of the GSN projects, we also developed some online monitoring systems that would then help those societies in areas where it's possible to upload directly some of the data into a system that we could easily then use to monitor and look at how the trends, look at the needs of the various communities. In terms of priorities and approaches, yes, we are trying to have different ways, but what we focus on is not how we do it, but what we need to achieve to do it. Taking into consideration that the communities are at different levels, both in terms of capacity, understanding, and availability of resources. So there is that opening that we agree on what we want to achieve and then support the civil societies where possible to achieve that using their own means and approaches based on. I hope that helps.
Hi everyone, my name is Milka Chukuru. I work for the ICC Institution and I belong to the Silver People of Kenya. I am indigenous. I don't know who to direct my question to, but I think more to the guy from the German ministry is as from a funder's perspective, I see you these challenges that that come towards the implementation of GBF. And I wonder if there is this one specific one that I have seen with many governments is their own capacity. That many of the funders and CSOs are going to communities to really empower communities about the NBSAP. And then a lot of pressure is put to a government that has limited capacity in terms of personnel or in terms of even the grasping the knowledge of what the GBF is, or to a government that the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Agriculture is not speaking to each other, while it is the same biodiversity we are trying to conserve, and the other ministry is trying to get rid of the same biodiversity. I wonder how, from a donor's perspective, you handle that, and maybe from the government and representative in the media also, on how you're balancing between ministries that are working on the same things, because I see from the Kenyan government a lot of sibling rivalry between ministries, and so leaves communities with a lot of knowledge about what needs to be done. But then this is improving, this is subtracting. And have you seen that, and how do you handle that?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think those technical work packages that we offer through GSF, they're generally open and depend on the demand that our partner countries articulate towards us. So when governmental institutions are also demanding technical support and how to set up the mechanism, how to disseminate GBF knowledge throughout different ministries, or maybe setting up, I don't know, intergovernmental or interministerial consultation rounds. Those are like valid needs that would be assessed, and then together we could identify ways on how to approach them. So it's always like the both side of the coin. It's like helping the civil society organizations, IPC organizations to really allow them to meaningfully participate, but also the state government agencies and organizations to organize all this. In general terms, I would also say that, for example, with I don't know, Kenya, with maybe of our partner countries, we're not only dealing with like addressing the biodiversity sector jointly, but also like working in other sectors. So that is why we also try to transmit the narrative of the need to mainstream biodiversity throughout all the sectors. So it would not only be that we maybe address the environmental ministry, but also through our support of other sectors, trying to step by step integrate the idea of the need to mainstream biodiversity also in urban development, in the private sector development, in the agricultural development. So that is also part of the game, you can say.
In terms of how to manage the conflicts between by industries, and I think we are big territorial industries. I think it's because we all natural resources. But what we have done is we took a two-pronged approach. One is to have a national NBSAP, the NB Namibia committee that has all line ministries that are responsible for biodiversity, in addition to the ministries responsible for justice, trade, and intellectual properties, so that we do discuss all these things in a harmonized way, trying also to leverage on skills and resources that we get. And then, of course, in addition to the ministries, then you have the civil society, academia, and also the trade. But also we have formed the high-level dialogue platform where our executive directors and ministers do get to sit to try also to mainstream biodiversity in the different sectors, but also to raise the level. And hopefully what we are targeting is to see if we will be able to increase the funding for biodiversity to those kind of systems. So those are the two approaches we have tried, and that seems to be successful.
Just very quickly, thank you for the question from our colleague from Kenya. It's quite coincidental that the example that you mentioned is about environment and agriculture. I'm just happy to share that after, I believe, many years of trying to work together, finally in 2021, October 6, 2021 to be exact, our Department of Agriculture and our Department of Environment and Natural Resources came up with a joint administrative order titled the Mainstreaming Biodiversity-Friendly Agricultural Practices in and around Protected Areas and Promoting the Safe and Wider Agricultural Landscape. I just wanted to share that it's possible for competing ministries or departments to come up with joint administrative orders or joint efforts like this towards addressing biodiversity conservation, at the same time addressing the mandate of the agriculture sector to produce the necessary food for the country. But this is one of many other things that we need to address, like especially in the marine ecosystem. That's another avenue altogether, and we have not yet found a convergence there. It's a work in progress, but at least in this one, I hope other countries can also come up with something similar. Thank you very much.
And I'm leading the present program on the communication, which is presented, and I wanted to compliment that what we're trying to do is work in all our countries with the environmental ministries, but also with the committees, as such, just mentioned Henry. The environmental ministry is leading, of course, it's the focus points are leading, but we're trying to bring together all sectors, all relevant sectors in a whole of government approach, also on national and local level, especially in Brazil, for example, we're trying this as well.
to bring together different levels, national levels in Indonesia as well. This is a focus on departmental implementation of NBSAPs. And the second part is, I think, important to see that there are sectoral ministries that are very, very interested also in working together, especially if I may just talk a bit about Peru, where, for example, we are trying to work on agrobiodiversity in situ conservation, and that is the mandate of the agriculture ministry, and they actually want to engage in this. So I think it's not always there's overlapping mandates, sometimes there's also overlapping interests, and these come together in the national committees, but are also very much articulated towards supporting programs and projects, not only to GSF as such, but also to the NBSAP Accelerator Partnership, the GBF for the Action Support Project. We're all there on the ground trying to coordinate with the environmental ministries, all things also from the sectoral ministries. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl, and thanks everyone for the great contributions. I'm Mauricio with the Policy People's Program, so I'm a close colleague of Helen. So I'm not going to contradict you, Helen, for sure, but I want to complement just based on two questions that were raised here today on the indicators and on monitoring. Because to put things into context, I think at COP15, there was a great progress in terms of the goals and targets and Section C in the GBF. However, there were massive gaps in the monitoring framework, partly because the negotiations on monitoring framework were relegated to the last very few days of the COP, where the goals and targets were still being debated and negotiated. So we all realized that there were massive gaps. Of course, the active on indicators was set up to address some of those gaps. Some progress has been made, and for example, as last week, there is now a proposal for COP16 to adopt headline indicators for target 22, including land use change and tenure. And actually, I acknowledge the support from Brazil and Namibia here to getting that forwarded from SAPSA to the COP. However, it's also clear that there are still major gaps, and the Arctic recognized that especially guidance on human rights-based monitoring is still needed. So while progress has been happening, I think there is still quite a long way to go to fill those gaps. What happened in terms of positive outcome from COP15 was actually a full recognition and inviting parties to support community-based monitoring and citizen science. So I think another action stream there is really to operationalize that COP decision on supporting monitoring. So it's great to hear the experience from Namibia, for example, of already integrating community monitoring, in their national system. But that is, a lot more can be done in many different countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauricio. We will we're coming to a close in this session. The authors of the study, everybody are here. So if you want to meet them later, you can. And also, I'm sure our parties will also be happy to meet you. Just at the end, we couldn't have Ms. Astrid Riano, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. But she has sent a message for all of us, so we would just like to play it as a closing for this session. Shruti, if you could just play it.
Thank you for the invitation and congratulations for organizing this very important conversation. I am sorry I could not join live, and I am also happy to contribute with these reflections. Today, as states are preparing national biodiversity strategies action plans, we have the unique opportunity to reflect and implement the transformational changes that we need. This is especially important as evidence has constantly and painfully reminded us that current efforts are not getting to the solutions that we need. The IPBES concluded in their global assessment report that transformative changes are needed. They expressively concluded, that goals for conserving and sustainably using nature and achieving sustainability cannot be met by current trajectories, and goals for 2030 and beyond may only be achieved through transformative changes across economic, social, political, and technological efforts. The main objective of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is precisely to respond to the IPBES assessment and other scientific studies and communities' conclusions that biodiversity is being degraded at rates unprecedented in human history. The IPBES also recognizes that justice and inclusion in conservation, including respecting human rights in conservation decisions, is a key leverage point to yield exceptionally large effects. The importance of respecting human rights and incorporating a human rights approach is already recognized in the biodiversity framework. Thus, today the question is not if we include a human rights approach, but how to make this happen. Acknowledging the concern from states about the time, resources, and capacities to make this happen, I want to remind states and non-state actors that actually incorporating a human rights biodiversity approach can help states and all actors incorporated in the biodiversity plans to find additional resources, opportunities, and capacities to make sure that biodiversity plans are actually being effectively implemented. Over and over again, scientific evidence and communities' experience have showed that the inclusion and effective participation of indigenous peoples, women, youth, children, communities in general in rural areas, Afro-descendant communities included, has showed how effectively this is to advance better conservation and the protection of biodiversity. Therefore, it is key to use all of this knowledge and incorporate the diversity of the knowledge to make sure that today's biodiversity plans will be actually more effective. In all of this process, the inclusion and respect of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment can be a very important tool. On the one hand, healthy biodiversity and healthy ecosystems is a key element of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. In addition to this, the inclusion and the respect of procedural rights of access to information, participation, and access to justice are also key elements of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. In this sense, respecting this right can be a great bridge to connect human rights worlds and the conservation and biodiversity conservation worlds to make sure that the inclusion of the human rights approach is better done and that we use all previous knowledge. Today, I encourage states and all non-state actors involved in developing biodiversity plans to take advantage of the unique opportunity we have, recognizing the complexity of the challenge we face, and deciding to incorporate a human rights approach to complement and catalyze the effective actions needed to make sure that biodiversity is actually protected. We know that this is part of a state's responsibility. It's also the obligation of states, but I also know that non-state actors and businesses are a key part of this process. Therefore, I also invite non-state actors and businesses to learn from and to embrace and incorporate the responsibility to respect human rights to make sure that biodiversity plans are actually implemented and effectively done. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. With this, we are coming to the end of the session. We are really thankful to all our host organizations. There are a lot, so I'm not going to read it down. But thank you all, and especially to all the parties who have come and have been part of this side event. Thank you so much, and all the participants who've joined us here in person and online. Thank you so much, and we'll be around. So please catch hold of any of us if you have any questions on the specific outputs that we discussed. Thank you, and have a good day.